Hey, all right. So we're back, and thanks everybody for joining the weekly hangout for the Dalton Collective. So this week, as in a few prior weeks, we've been talking about sort of reputation or something something a bit more specific than just what we sort of all keep in our heads about who's a good actor and who's not, who can be trusted and who's not, and or maybe those aren't exactly the binary things we keep in our head, but something like if I ask this person to do something, what's my expectation around that ask or something like that. And for this group specifically, as we are sort of really dependent on one another for either getting work done or organizing in lots of other ways, it would be good to formalize this a little bit, or at least to some degree. And the thing that I've been at least getting feedback on is something called the trust metric, which is a simple idea enough. It's like a web of trust in a network of people where you can sort of record the amount of trust you have in a certain person. And then all of those attestations, all grouped together, can sort of aggregate into some sort of global score or something like that. That's the general idea. There's a bit of academic research to back it up in terms of like how would you actually go about calculating this thing. We even have some implementations done in Python, thanks to Dan Connolly. And so I want to continue exploring this idea of using something like this for membership with a few tweaks, obviously, I think, to make it part of what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. And specifically within the domain of membership, we've also talked about in the past about how membership is sort of a sliding scale as opposed to something that's either decided by a group of people, like a committee that says, yes, the membership committee has decided that this person is now part of the group, or strictly, or some other mechanism, which would be sort of like a recommendation or a buy-in or some other way of becoming a member. So we have this idea that you can work your way into the Dalton Collective. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it shouldn't be so prescriptive either that you just have to dot your I's and cross your T's and now you're in. So it should be at least at some level subjective, but also enough so with enough observation or enough backing from enough other people that it holds weight with the rest of the group. So this is very much for the idea that I vouch for Rapsis vouched for me, and we all also vouch for Christian, who just joined. So that's the kind of idea. But I had when I was talking with about this idea this last week, I realized there was one piece about this that we'd want to change, at least from the way it's implemented that currently, which is to say that you can backslide, right? And I think we should be careful about that type of thing. So if you work your way into the Dalton Collective, as I've imagined, it would be sort of like a 3-step process. Or actually 4. So the first part of reputation you have is like reputation 0. You have no reputation, but you're at least here, right? You can still see maybe, so you've joined the group in Urbit, something like that, and you've started the process. Then the next one is sort of like a journeyman, the next one being a craftsman, and then finally like a master, right? So this is the rough idea that I've sort of scoped out of my head. But once you've achieved master status, you don't really, quote, lose it. And typically, I think in a social graph, that would be held true, unless you do something. And this isn't reputation in the sense of you were bad. It's also in the sense of there's a certain skill level associated with that. And maybe we want to have some. And maybe this metric that we're thinking about is really more a skills-based metric as opposed to like, are you a nice person type of idea. Maybe we just continue to hold that as a social construct. And then as the group gets bigger and that's harder to keep track of, we have a couple options that we can explore at that time, either splitting the group, forking, or having some other way to come up with some other means of looking at that. So the proposition I have here today is that we sort of get a better handle on what does it mean to join into as a member, like a full member, or what tier is that? Is this the trust metric thing that we want to commit to? Now, I think we've talked about it a lot, and I think we generally agree that this is probably good, but I want to make sure that we're still checking in. And if it is, what resources can we put behind it to make it happen? Okay, so that's the goal for today if we can. And I'm really glad that that David showed up here too, because he's got kind of a really great set of experience between both of those languages, Python and Hoon, for example. Actually, probably a few others here too. But anyway, I'll just stop there, open it up, get some feedback, see what people think, and what we might be able to do from here. Sound good? All right, let's do it.
Right. So, can you hear me? Am I
Yeah,
muted?
Go ahead.
Excellent. So, I only got half of that, unfortunately. Oh, by the way, I have to say to Rapfir, I'm loving that Pokeball on your wall behind you. It's very appropriate for your sigil slash Pat P, of course. Anyway, so I had to say that. Sorry, I'll try moving the mic a bit closer to my mouth. So,
Yeah,
uh,
thank you.
okay, excellent. So, what I was going to say, because I only caught half of that, but it seemed you were talking about like the trust score thing, and like you have tiers, like um, you rise in the ranks, and then you're saying it should be about technical competency more than social skills, which sounds reasonable to me because how things are set up, right, is like one person can't, even if they're top rank, they can't act unilaterally to cause problems for other people. So I suppose just keeping it like on a technical skill basis makes sense, right? Because that's what you want. You want the people who have the technical skills running the show rather than the people who are very friendly and nice, like me, but useless. So that makes sense to me. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Yeah. And I will say that technical doesn't necessarily mean like you can program something. It can also mean that you can organize people who program, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, one can also imagine maybe like there being like multiple vectors. Like, I mean, in terms of like maybe someone. I mean, just actually, this is like a good example where it's like one vector might be like technical skill along like programming angle, another might be like like people project management style skills. Like those are like different vectors
Yeah.
that can provide insight about like, oh well, what are the roles going to be in this endeavor or whatever.
By the way, Sarpin, that is a dramatic change in your appearance.
Yeah, I mean it's just hot,
You're just like, cut it off.
and like, it's just I had to go, you know. I was walking home from the grocery store, and there was just like sweat dripping down into my eyes, and it's like, and I can't like wipe it out because I was just in a grocery store. I haven't washed my hands. It's COVID, and I'm just like, barely able to see.
Nice.
So
I do have AC. We like that's just one of the graces of America is most homes are with air conditioning.
how do you see? So supposing someone who has limited technical, I guess what I'm at. Okay, sorry. I think vision and direction are aptitudes that certain people have, and that are of a good deal of value, but they may not be concurrent with the ability to lead programmers or program oneself. How do you make sure that good ideas are surfaced in a system like this?
Well, I think this is not. I don't think this should be a governance tool.
Mm.
It's an admittance criteria. Does that make sense? But it's not a criteria that's explicit. It's not like pass this test. It's sort of like show us what you can do, and if we're impressed, you're in.
Okay. I wonder, I feel like I can still ask the same question because I think that like visionary people might be really helpful to have in a group like this, even if they're not capable of executing their vision themselves. In fact, I wonder, maybe that's wrong because I do think it's people who are visionary and can execute rise to the limelight themselves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
and maybe there aren't people who are visionary who can't execute, but we also wouldn't know either way, because if they don't get someone to back them in their vision, then they never get their product to market and no one knows about them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and so maybe a slightly adjacent thought that I had as you were speaking about it was like, okay, if I'm totally green and I come into this, how am I going to prove myself if I don't have access? Maybe I don't think that's exactly what you're asking, but I think it's at least
similar,
related.
though. Yeah.
And I think that is the governance question you mentioned before, which is to say, somebody completely green, that's not to say that they don't have access. That's not to say that we don't include them fully in the work that that team is trying to accomplish, right? It just means that they have less formal rights and ownership than others do until they've managed to actually accomplish what it is that they've set out to accomplish. And that,
Okay.
in this same way, you could think about like staffers for somebody in Congress or in the Senate. You know, the person who got, quote, elected, they very rarely write the laws themselves. It's the staffers that do that. That's real legislative work, right? They don't necessarily get recognized for it, but that might be good experience for then pursuing their own career later in politics, as an example.
Okay, that makes sense. What's this valve point that's been brought?
Oh,
Is
yes, absolutely. So this is a really cool. I encourage everybody to read this if you haven't. I saw this back in my days at Maker. Fortunately, it's not something that we ever really fully pursued, but it's sort of like, how would you build? It's more mechanistic about how would you build one of these sort of flat organizations or flat-ish organizations. Really, the way Steam sort of worked is that there was like this layer of executives sort of watching everybody do their thing and still did a bit of the day-to-day. But for the most part in Steam, which was a gaming company, or still is, I think, right? Like if you had an idea for a game and you're like, hey, everybody, I want to do this thing. Here's my plan. People could work on it and work on other projects at the same time. And if it was cool, everybody wanted to work on that thing. And that's how they sort of allocated resources, was almost like was the internal motivations of everybody, intrinsic motivations, as opposed to, you know, top-down sort of organization. And that's very much similar to what I think we're trying to shoot for with Dalten, especially if you think about a gaming company as like, you know, our mission is to create games, but we create lots of different kinds of games. So how do we create a game? Maybe Dalten is like, you know, our mission is to do collective work, but then we have lots of different things that we do. So in that sense, it's very much open for participation for different lines of work, and you'd allocate resources kind of accordingly. But this particular like handbook is much more explicit than what you might find in lots of other places, which is a good like, oh, this is really interesting. But also, if I remember correctly, it's still really hard, right? It's not easy to do, and I don't know if this actually was ultimately successful or maintained in this way, but I definitely have read this.
I know that they did implement it. The specific
they did. They totally did.
The specific point I wanted to draw attention to is like the way that they hired people, that anyone had the authority to bring on new people to the company. If they felt that they could, if they were necessary to complete whatever project, they had a very, very broad authority to hire people.
Yeah.
Within I can't even remember if there were any bounds at all, honestly. It's been a while since I've read this.
Right. And at least in some sense, we're different than a typical corporation, because we're not, the whole goal here is not to just take a wage, right? So it's going to be ownership of the thing that matters the most, which is basically like equity / assets / things that gain in value over time, with some cash flow, because you can't really have one or the other. You need both. But that is to say that compensation in the Dalten Collective is going to be sort of an ongoing kind of dance.
So is the output of the valve structure that there could be a class of reputation that is sufficient that you get on board unilaterally, or do you still want to avoid that as a potential case?
Like an individual?
Yeah, so if an individual has a sufficient reputation in the group, like, could they onboard people based on that reputation unilaterally?
I don't remember, honestly.
No,
My intuition would be
I'm hearing that it was for Valve, but like, should it be that way for us? Is what I'm asking.
I don't think so. Not unilateral. Like,
Okay.
and that's kind of the point of a trust metric. Would be like, I, as an individual, could say, this person is so amazing. I think they should go from 0 to 4. Like, they're a master. Clearly, they're a master. And I send my reputation to them, or I signal that. But if nobody else does, that doesn't mean they're automatically a master, right? The score is still weighted based on the rest of the group and the rest of the sets of masters and journeymen and intermediaries. And so but if 3 or 4 masters also did the same thing, that person jumps the queue like right away, like right up to the top. Which is something we've also talked about in the sense of there might be slightly different roles in here, where people might be coming from a different set of experiences that would be useful for the Dalten Collective, and they would slot in at different places. Meaning there could be one that comes in and provides mentorship-like functionality, organization, and capital, right? And then there's different people that come in with very low experience and no capital. We want paths for both. Well, maybe jumping to the technical parts of this. So I had a chance to share the implementation last week, but I also shared it with David specifically. If you've had a chance to look at it, great. If not, what is your sort of initial technical assessment of what this would what this might look like in Urbit as either a Gall app or some other sort of application that we could all run together?
You could definitely implement this sort of thing as a Gall app. And as long as you are able to add, I guess you tie this reputation to the Pat P.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you hear things on the network about a given Pat P, then you can add that to the set of data that you're using to calculate this trust metric. So, that seems pretty straightforward to me. Mark will probably have a better idea of actual implementation of something like that because he has much more Gall experience than I do. But this definitely seems extremely doable.
Yeah, and I think in our last conversation, we sort of roughly described this as a global state, right? So there's some state, some function that operates on it, and then some way for a certain set of people to change it or add to it or whatever that is, right?
I think you can implement it in a way that you don't. You could have something. You could definitely build something like this on top of like Azimuth itself, right? Because then you have that set. You have that global state already exists in the blockchain, and then how it gets modified would have to do with just contracts that are smart contracts that are on Ethereum. You could also build it. That would make it public.
Yeah.
This in some sense this it needs to be. I would think that in some way it needs to be at least quasi-public to all members of the collective. Whether or not that's exposed to the public at large, I think is up for debate. But so, I mean, you can implement it that way. You could also implement this, like I was saying, as a Gall app. And the nice thing about doing it that way is that all you would have to do is poke the app and say, trust person X at level Y, or however it is that you do that. Then that message can then be broadcast to anyone else who's listening for these messages, and they can take that into consideration however they decide to do that. Like, what that would allow you to do is that anybody can then provide you like trust metric information, and then you decide how much you care about that, right? So like maybe I can tell you that I trust Mark a certain amount, and that's great, but you have decided that you don't trust me, so it's less important, or it's more important, or however you want to weight that.
Yeah. That's actually exactly what the trust metric does. Like it looks at those weights between the trust lines to make sort of these aggregate scores.
Right. And what I'm saying is that you wouldn't need to necessarily maintain this as a global state. You can maintain this as an internal state for you.
Oh, I say yes. But would I be able to maybe either scry your state or get some sort of update from you?
You would definitely want a way to...
because I need to know about your attestations to calculate that.
Yes, yeah, right. So like my attestations would like come out as you would subscribe to that app.
Yeah,
you would subscribe to whoever you care about, who's running this application, and then you would get any attestation that they create. The thing that is useful about organizing it this way is that you can changing trust metrics doesn't become necessarily a sort of a political thing, right? Like where, say that someone new comes on and everybody thinks this person is amazing and great, but you're kind of hesitant about them, and like, you know, they don't seem to really have the idea, and you say, oh, I'm going to give them trust metric 3, and then they're like, well, why did you give me a 3? Everybody else gave me 4s. But you can maintain that state internally for your own calculations, as opposed to necessarily having to broadcast everything, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly.
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
You can maintain like an internal level of like, how much do I personally trust this person versus when you want to say publicly, I trust this person X, Y, Z amount.
Yeah, so you could have 2 metrics, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. So one public that we use as a group because it's public, and the other private you just use for your sort of internal accounting.
Right. I don't know if that would end up being useful or not, but
it sounds interesting to me.
Something that it could have potential, I feel like.
Yeah, it's similar to like sort of my feelings. I mean, I think, David, you probably maybe looked at the Python implementation more than I have, which is essentially none. But I mean, what you said sort of corresponds somewhat with like just different things that I thought about maybe how it's like, because like, I mean, and one is like, you know, like, I mean, because it's like, I mean, I guess like a key question is like if it's being orchestrated by group, well, there's like a few possibilities. Like one would be that, you know, the state, you know, one would have like an instance of the application for the group, and you know, the state would be on one ship, and so like people, you know, much like chat is stored on a single ship, people would like add their metrics of people relative to the group, yeah, like relative to the context. But like on the other hand, it's like you could, yeah, basically maybe like, have like your own sort of like individual metrics that then people like subscribe to. Maybe like and then so like, the state is like local to your ship for like your information, like your appraisal. Like maybe there's like, a private and then a public that like, like only you have access to private and other people can subscribe to public. Maybe like a synthesis of the two approaches might be that, as opposed to the group being situated relative to a particular ship, or like the state being on a particular ship, could have is like, basically still, putting metrics on people relative to a particular group, and then you use the group store. You use the group store basically to like, basically approve subscriptions to your metrics of people relative to that group.
How far does the branching go? Like, so we have people we can call trust recipients and people who are trusters, let's say. And if I value a truster's opinion of a trust recipient, do I thereby value the trust recipient's appraisal of further trust recipients as them being the truster? Does that make sense? Or should it stop at one branching?
Well, this is also the academic research, right? So this is actually, I think there's a term for this in the paper that I looked at on Wikipedia, or at least the Wikipedia article. It's like something flow or something. They've got the diagrams where they've got all the, the network and the pointers and how it just gets crazy quickly, right? This can be computationally heavy. So this particular implementation is probably making trade-offs in terms of branching and complexity. And there's certain, like, I don't think it's exactly like a, like a big O problem where it's quadratically increasing in computation as the network scales, but there's probably some limitation on that. Or there certainly is some limitation on that, on how many nodes in the network can be computed within a reasonable time.
Yeah, and so, that point, like in terms of like how you weight other people's weightings, like is interesting because it's like, because there's
that's all been
there's like a couple of different aspects. One is like maybe, there's lots of like design possibilities, but like one would be like they're just general like how much do I trust this person's weighting? But then there's like also like how much, like you could also maybe how much do I trust their weighting for like this particular vector, like technical competency, people skills. And so.
All right, but here we are. So what do we think about at least making a stab at this, or going at it a little bit more technical?
I got one more question. Is trust a global metric of the person, or do people have trust in areas? And can I, like, suppose I think someone is a very good programmer, I could trust their opinion of other programmers, but perhaps not their opinion of somebody's niceness or capacity to do lifting or whatever, these other things that are unrelated.
So what I'd like to propose is a global metric for an individual based on membership criteria or membership acceptance. So in this case, it is singular in its purpose. I'm only trying to determine whether or not this person is a member or not. That's at least in the lowest primary, like the lowest thing we could do. But really, like in terms of where they are in that level ship, like sliding scale. So you could think about that as a combination of everything, or you could think about it as a very narrow thing. And that's actually kind of okay, I think, right? The subjectiveness of all of those ways that you might want to rank this should be sort of taken into account. But if you're very strict, like this is the way I think it should be done, and I think everybody should do it this way, feel free to make your case. And if you convince me, then I will apply your case to my assessments. But that's what is being assessed, is like membership.
I don't think it's problematic to start there, at least, because at minimum you could always expand to other layers or other columns, I guess I would call them, silos of trust types.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
As well as
Go
ahead.
I guess my question is, if you're using this as a way to determine membership, what advantage are you getting out of having a system like this over just straight up having the existing accepted members vote on whether or not someone is in or not?
Yeah, so that is like sort of the most default way to sort of do it. Create a membership committee, give them a criteria, and submit an application. So, like, if this is not something we want to do, that's probably what we should do.
I'd be interested. I like that question. What are the differentiators between those two things? This is less burdensome, perhaps, on the group in the sense that you don't have to hold votes like that. It also maybe scales a little better if the group gets very large. It helps at least prioritize who is at the top of the queue for being entered, as you described. Are there other reasons too?
I would suggest that this trust metric is actually going to push so not everybody needs to like extend trust lines, right? Like if I don't know you, I don't have to say anything about that. So if I do know you though, and you extend these things, then we're pushing the decision making to the places who have the most information, which I think is a general pattern we should strive for.
So unlike voting in regular politics.
Right, to vote, right? And I say everybody's got to vote or whatever. And like, Raps, if you've never met this guy, you're like, I don't know.
Right. This is how we elect judges. Like nobody knows anything about the people.
Especially the nonpartisan ones, right? Like, how do I know? Like,
I mean, you can redesign your voting system to solve for that problem by like making abstention and no the same thing, right? Like, so that way someone can say, I don't know this person, I abstain from this vote, but that's essentially saying like I lack the information to judge whether or not this person should be allowed in, and if enough people lack that information, then I mean that's kind of your answer,
Mm-hmm.
I'm hesitant to advocate for quantifying things that are very difficult to quantify that humans do naturally, I guess. And I understand the impulse to do that is based on because like human judgment is subjective, and it can be very difficult to draw reasonable conclusions from that, and it's much easier if you have some kind of concrete metric that you can say something about. But kind of the reality is that like this is how humans function, right? Like we make these subjective judgments about people all the time, whether or not we're thinking about it. And what I'm wondering is what concrete benefits are you getting out of building this trust system as a kind of quantified metric, because you also have the potential for it to become like we were talking about in our conversation yesterday, for it to become just like a political mess. Well, like if I trust this guy, and so you should trust this guy too, because if you don't, then we don't work on the same things together, and it becomes a fight about like things that are irrelevant, I guess.
Two questions. If there were more silos of trust, types of trust, would it help make more informed decisions amongst the voting populace? So like if it wasn't just do I trust this person or not, but I I value them in this regard and that regard, and you know who I am, and I have good opinions about those types of things, would that help make more informed decisions? And then secondly, maybe you could avoid, or do you think you could avoid the political aspects if rather than relying on your trust of another person, there's like a concrete metric for how much trust is worth. So you suppose you have one ship running the application, and trust is just valued at the level of the truster. So if a truster is a master, they get this much weight, and then down the line, and it's blind to who's doing that trusting for a given end user, a given trustee. Does that make sense?
Can you say it again?
So we have this one construction where, let's say, Rapfer says, I trust phonics, right, this much. And then I rate Rapfer's opinion for my metric itself. But that can be political because then I have some understanding of Rapfer's trust of various different people, right? And that's the concern. Could you ameliorate that concern by having a concrete and structured method for weighting trust that occurs blind to everyone? So the value that you see for a given ship is just the output of that rubric.
You could, but it's not auditable in that sense. Auditable.
Yes.
So
okay.
if we had our internal metrics and the only thing we spit out was like, the whatever though I don't know how that's any different like from actually, whatever that is. Well, whatever the output is could be blinded, but I don't understand necessarily how global state is defined. Meaning if it can't calculate global state without the inputs, then no. If it can, or if the certain inputs are blind, as you said, then you could. I just don't know. I think it depends on technicals. But I see where you're going with that. Like you could avoid some political issues if it wasn't apparently clear who voted for what and by how much. We just know what the end score is.
Apparently, Urbit has ring signatures implemented.
It does, yeah.
Which would be useful for the blinding.
But that's something to consider. One other pattern that I use in Metacartel Ventures is there's a signal vote, which is basically like upvotes or downvotes in Discord, which is a very loose construction, but still works pretty well for a direction. And then there's a vote. Something like that. And it's usually a vote of no quorum and a just yes or no, or like it's always yes or no, and it's just yeses versus nos, but no quorum at all.
I want to circle back and ask David about the columns of trust. So like if there were more vectors of trust other than just should this person be a member or not, do you feel that provides more information to a voting party that would make this system useful? Like does that address your concern about this not being more or less useful than just a regular vote?
I mean, potentially. The problem that I think you may have with doing that sort of thing is you can imagine a world where there's like 5 different criteria based on that everyone has decided like these are the things that we're going to rate everyone on. Well, now I have to rate everybody based on these things, or at least everyone that I know, and I don't wanna. Like it becomes like it makes the barrier becomes just the effort you have to put forward to that becomes like this onerous like Byzantine process unto itself. That you end up potentially drowning in the work of this rating system rather than drowning in the work of just like having a committee and having votes. So I'm not sure that in that case you actually end up saving yourself any effort, or you're actually getting a net gain out of it. because now you have to like the advantage of having a simple like up down, like is this person in or is it not vote, is that like you like read their application or whatever it is, you consider their body of work, you discuss it as a group, then you have a vote, and then you move on with your lives. Whereas like with this like trust metric, like you're continually going to be like going through and like updating this for interactions that you have, and that it seems to me that there's a potential there for that to take a lot of brain power. Sorry, someone's trying to talk to me. Speaking of brain power, a lot of brain power that could be better devoted to other things. Like this is clearly something that needs to be decided by Dalten as a group. But my concern for a system like this is you want to be sure that you're actually getting a clear and tangible benefit out of implementing it. Because if you're not, then you're just like kind of adding layers of sort of just layers of paperwork on top of your system for no real reason. If that makes sense.
Well, I should say for tangible benefit, the only thing we have in terms of membership that's real is the multi-sig, which is like 5, and 2 of these people aren't actively participating. They're just sort of there as just to make sure the keys don't get lost. So in that sense, there's only 3 people that could be, and they're all on this call, which could be considered either members or at least have actual ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the tangible benefit, whatever process we choose, should be that we know who's in, like, because that's something we currently don't know. And we can't really do any work until we have a way to, like, apportion resources and that sort of thing.
Are you saying you need, like, there's no way to tell who's in and who's out outside of who's on the multi-sig? And you want something outside of that, or
not even that, really? That's just the closest thing we have, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't. We've done a lot of thinking about this and talking about it, but we haven't done a lot of doing anything about it. We haven't set. We need to set some sort of process, some sort of procedure. That's going to be the immediate benefit, though. Any process will give us some output, like anything.
So I wonder if there are 2 things we can do here. Like, I think that the trust metric could have value in a variety of applications outside of just ours. So let's imagine, like I run a chat about fitness, and there's another one on Urbit too. But you could have people sort of upvoting and downvoting opinions in a chat about fitness to kind of highlight their text in a chat to make it clear that other people have valued their opinion about how to do exercise, right? Like, and that might be valuable to people who are new to the chat to differentiate those that have just, bro science opinions from those that have decent opinions. So it might be even valuable for us to develop the system, even if we decide that it's not right for us, as a product that could then be applied to other systems. And
true.
I had another thought that escaping me. Oh, yeah. No, it doesn't matter. Well, okay, yeah. So we could start out, like, because of the difficulty of identifying who's in the collective right now and the limitation of the multi-sig as the metric, we could start out with a voting system and a log and develop this as a product, and post having developed it as a product, decide if it's right for us, and still potentially reap some value from having developed it by, using it in other applications or providing it to other people as a service.
I think that sounds like a really good idea to me. I mean, I've had analogous situations where I've stumbled into a community. In the case I'm particularly thinking about, joined the bonsai subreddit on Reddit, and when you go in there are certain people who clearly like are super into that and like know a lot about it and are very knowledgeable, but it's not obvious as a newcomer, like when you come in, like if someone says something to you, like are they full of crap or not? Right? Like you have no context on which to base that. So I think that a trust metric like that could be an extremely useful signaling tool for new members, if absolutely at nothing else, to be like, hey, this person, like, we think that this person knows what they're talking about. That I think would be a really useful thing to have in general.
That's what it was designed for. Like that's what it's being used for right now on the internet. Is like who can actually write blog posts on this blog. That's how it's being used.
Like if the state was maintained by a ship that Dalten controlled for all of those different groups, and maybe they wouldn't want to participate in that, but that might be a service that we could render for a nominal fee. You know what I mean? Like if that might be a revenue source, or even just selling that technology to the various people who want to run their own ship that has a chat on it or whatever system to like effectively selling this trust metric to the Reddits of the subreddits of the Urbit world, which are chats and groups and that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, I like this idea, but maybe getting more concrete, since we have a thing that does voting now that can do things, i.e. the multi-sig. I propose that that's what we use as the basis of membership for now. Meaning there's two components to that: which addresses are on it and what the quorum is. Those are the two most important pieces, right? So then it would be, we'd have to figure out how people got onto the multi-sig and when the quorum changed.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I don't think that you want every member on the multi-sig. I think we have a token, pass a token to their Ethereum ID. Like that could indicate. I think only high-level members should be in the multi-sig, just to avoid the confusion of having, dozens of people on a multi-sig that requires X numbers of signatures to effectuate some decision. But could pass. I guess tokens can be freely passed once they're given to one person, though, huh? So it's not like.
Well, there's other options too. Like I said before, the other group that I'm a part of, the Metacartel Ventures.
Yeah,
that is all mitigated by smart contracts. It's called the Moloch DAO V2. But I mean, DX DAO has got their own framework. There's a lot of quote DAO frameworks that do voting, sometimes by share, sometimes just by membership. So that could be a way to go. Is that we would launch a some DAO contracts that can do voting.
What do you think is better out of those two options?
DAO contracts. That's more.
I mean,
what it's meant for.
That or adding everyone to the multi-sig are the two options.
I think it's probably best to go with something like with a multi-sig, or not with the multi-sig. It's best to go with sort of like a, like a DAO structured thing with an interface and all that other kind of stuff.
Okay.
DAO stack, whatever.
The DAO stack has rep, which is correlated with voting power.
Right, and so does Metacartel Ventures. Like, it's all about how many shares you have. So it's a lot of that stuff is sort of proportional. So
I was gonna mention something. I was trying to find this other link, which I finally found. I posted a Kialo, which I thought is it's a bit of a different sort of approach. Like, and so then it's kind of like, you have this kind of like dialogical like back and forth of like providing feedback on like a certain topic. So like maybe like, because this is, kind of about like governance and like how we decide something, maybe a different, like, say like there's like a certain position, role, or status of membership, it could be like a proposal, and then it like breaks into this sort of like back and forth of like people providing input, people maybe disagreeing, agreeing with the input, reinforcing an argument, and so on.
This looks very slick for sure, but my guess is we wouldn't be in control of it.
No. But I mean, we can build it on Urbit.
Let's see. They do not. This is also not open source.
my friend built like a very, very simple like thing, which is quite similar. I'll link it here. He recommend I don't think he's touched it in quite a while. But it's it's kind of inspired by like interactive logics and stuff. But it's kind of like the same thing, but it's like a tree model.
Yeah.
I think there's like a bug with the sessions, which so like maybe like use it in incognito mode, because there's like problems with it. There's some bug with the cookie.
Distracted.
I don't mean to derail or anything, but
No, I mean it's good to consider options. So this is what I'll take away as a action item for me. I will look into some basically DAO frameworks and bring back some options to the group. Possibly some of these Web 2 options as well. And then we can decide to either move forward with one and get started, but also on the same side, we'll look at this reputation score metric thing as a potential line of business. And depending on how these things work, we might make some reevaluations at some point in the future.
what we could do is if we move to this like DAO framework. Well, I guess like would we keep the multi-sig for
It depends.
Dalton? I mean,
It
what you
depends.
could do if you don't want to like breach Dalton, you could just like make the DAO a member of the multi-sig and then remove all of their members, you know? And
Yeah.
so it just ends up being basically just like a simple proxy contract.
Yeah, you certainly could, but not all DAO frameworks can run arbitrary code, right? Some are very limited on what they can call,
Yeah.
which is nice.
DAO Stack and Aragon both can though.
Arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to like in DAO Stack you have to implement like a generic action scheme, and then
So you've got to
Aragon,
approve an ABI or
like,
something like that.
there's like agents. I'm sorry,
You have to like approve an ABI and an address.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, which also makes sense because you don't want it to run just anything. You want to actually like say, yeah, we want to interact with this smart contract and do it that way. So Phonics, no, we didn't decide anything. I have an action item to come back with some more stuff that I'm familiar with in terms of more fully featured voting schemes and contract systems in the decentralized autonomous organization space on Ethereum, because that's the most fully featured. There's also one here which looks really great and is probably really useful, but it's also just sort of the issue I see with that is it goes against do things on our own terms sort of ethos that we have. So not that it's a hard no, but I would say it's definitely got a strike against it. And
Wait,
then
what has a strike against it?
it's not under our control.
What product are you talking about? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I'm
no.
losing the reference. The Kialo thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. No, I wasn't suggesting we use that because it's actually like a public forum anyway. So
Yeah. Okay.
you know,
But something
there's
like
more
that
idea.
in terms of the logic trees is really actually a really great pattern in terms of like talking about things and actually trying to come up with some sort of like synthesis of ideas. So it could be certainly something we want to use for work, especially like to actually get things done.
So on topic and off topic. On topic, I would love to. I don't know how much value I can provide in this. I've done some software development and leading of a software development team in the past, but that was sort of just an epiphenomena of my current job, so I wouldn't say that I'm exactly skilled on it. But I'd love to see, if we're going to develop this solution as a potential product, I'd love to see how that happens from like soup to nuts. Like, yeah. I'd like to see the storyboarding of it and stuff like that. I think that would teach me a lot. So I'd love to be a part of that. And then second off-topic point, I still owe us incorporation, and I think I can get that done within the next week or so. That really should not be difficult. And having incorporated, we should then be able to, at our will, draft an operating agreement that covers various potential, or that tailors to whatever we decide our structure is going to be, and we can start with it just being simple voting of the people on the multi-sig or whatever. I can figure that out.
Okay. That sounds good. So we've got a couple different action items.
Oh, by the way, Rob stuff, you had your honeymoon, right?
Yeah, I just finished it.
Congrats, man.
Thank you. It was a really good time. I'll drink some wine that we bought for you guys. Pour a little out on the ground or something.
I'm going to go out for a bit to get booze for the Urbit happy hour tonight.
Oh, is that tonight?
Yeah, it's every Wednesday.
Yeah, have you been?
I've been once, but I've always class was at the same time as it, so I was teaching Hoon School at the time that it was on in the past. But I could make today's probably. That'd be cool.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I go pretty often. Yeah.
Cool.
It's fun.
Okay. All right. So wrapping up, or at least the recorded part. So I'm going to come back with some DAO frameworks for next week. Rapsif, you're going to come back with at least an update on incorporation, hopefully the entire thing. And then I'm also going to put together a working group for the trust metric. So
cool.
but Raps, if you want to work on that,
I would love to, at least to be a fly on the wall kind of thing.
All right. Well, since we're already here, let's go around the room. If anybody would like to work on that project, I am going to work on it. Okay. Well,
I'm
maybe
open to consulting on it. I just picked up more contract work, but it's part-time compared to the other, which was full-time. But I've got like outstanding Planet Bundle applications.
Yeah. Yes. You do have other things other fish to fry, so to speak. All right.
I think I could probably get Rizberg to work on it. Sorry.
And Phonics? Yeah.
Before I say anything, I should probably fully understand what I would be obliging myself to say, because I missed a bit. What were you?
So the idea here is that maybe we use trust metric for internal purposes. Maybe we don't. But the best way to build it, at least as a product, is to build it for ourselves first, use it, see what it does, but with the intent of basically selling it to other groups on Urbit, because it does seem like it would be useful.
Right. So would that involve any Gal work or
Yes.
Hoon work? Okay.
Yes.
I
Likely.
would be interested in that. So DM
Okay.
me.
Phonics
I'm-
is interested.
I'm the 101 level still, so I hope
Okay.
I would be able to do something useful.
Just
I'm
initial interest. No
open
hard.
to consulting or even helping here and there, just so
Okay.
you guys know. So,
Great.
do fetch me if you help.
Okay, and David, can I put you down for that same consulting if we need you?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'll probably ping Mark too, since he's up for that kind of stuff. All
We
right,
can
cool.
just volunteer him because he's not here.
Exactly.
Mark's in.
Easiest way to do it. Yo.
That's
All
what
right.
you get for leaving.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to stop the recording, but feel